Kara Varg never imagined a simple act of mercy could shatter every law of the pack. She was nothing, an Omega, the lowest rank, invisible to those who mattered. Her life was herb gathering, silence, and the bitter cold of existing on the edges of a world that had no place for her. But on that frozen winter night, as she moved through the forbidden forest collecting frost-touched healing plants, she heard something that would change everything. A sound so fragile, so desperate, it cut through the howling wind and pierced straight into her heart. Whimpering, weak, dying. She found it curled beneath the snow-laden branches of an ancient pine, a tiny wolf cub, silver-furred and bleeding, abandoned to freeze in the merciless cold. Its eyes, one silver, one gold, stared up at her with an intelligence that shouldn't exist in something so young, so helpless. Those eyes pleaded with her in a language older than words. "Don't leave me. Don't let me fade into nothing." Every law of pack hierarchy screamed at her to walk away. Omegas had no business with wolves. Her place was submission, service, silence. But Kara couldn't obey. Not this time. Not when those impossible eyes held hers with such ancient desperation. She wrapped the dying cub in her cloak and carried it through the blizzard to her cottage on the edge of pack territory, certain she had saved a helpless life. She named her Ember for the way her eyes glowed like embers in the darkness. But when dawn broke over the mountains, Kara's relief turned to pure shock. Ember wasn't acting like any wolf she'd ever known. She moved with grace that defied her injuries, stared with eyes that held centuries of wisdom, and radiated something Kara couldn't name, something that made even her own wolf whimper in instinctive recognition. What Kara discovered next would shake the foundations of pack hierarchy itself and force the legendary Alpha King to his knees. But before we see what Kara discovered about Ember, if you hate unfair systems that crush people for being different, hit that subscribe button right now and comment below where you're watching from. This story is about breaking those chains. Don't let the algorithm side with the pack hierarchy that tried to destroy Kara. Subscribe. The frost herbs grew only in the deepest part of the forest, where the ancient pines stood like silent sentinels, and pack law forbade Omegas from wandering. But Kara had learned long ago that survival meant breaking rules quietly. The pack needed her healing salves, even if they pretended not to see her when she delivered them. So she moved through the darkness with practiced silence, her breath forming white clouds in the bitter air, her fingers numb despite her worn gloves as she searched for the pale blue leaves that only bloomed under winter moonlight. The wind carried the sound to her, so faint she almost missed it beneath the howling storm. Whimpering, desperate and weak, like something fighting its last battle against the cold. Kara's heart clenched. She should keep walking. Should gather her herbs and return to her cottage before anyone noticed an Omega in forbidden territory. But her feet moved toward the sound instead, crunching through snow that reached her knees. She found the cub in the hollow of an ancient tree, curled so small she might have missed it entirely if not for the blood. Crimson stained the pristine snow around the hollow, stark and terrible against winter's white. The cub was silver-furred, impossibly tiny, and shaking so hard Kara could see it even in the darkness. But it was the eyes that stopped her breath, one silver as moonlight, one gold as sun. They opened as she approached, fixing on her with an intensity that shouldn't exist in something so young, so close to death. Those eyes pleaded with her in a language that transcended words. "Don't leave me. Don't let me fade into nothing." Kara's hands trembled as she reached toward the cub. They said Omegas had no business with wolves, that her place was submission, service, silence, that she was worthless, powerless, invisible. But kneeling there in the snow with this dying creature before her, something shifted in her chest. For once in her worthless life, she would choose mercy over law. The cub's fur was impossibly soft beneath her fingers, warm despite the cold trying to claim it. It whimpered again as she lifted it, and the sound broke something inside her. "I've got you," she whispered, knowing it couldn't understand but needing to say it anyway. "I won't let you go." She wrapped the cub in her cloak, pulling it against her chest where her body heat might keep it alive just a little longer. The storm intensified as she turned toward home, wind tearing at her hair and snow blinding her vision. But she kept walking, one foot in front of the other, feeling the cub's fragile heartbeat against her ribs. It felt like thunder somehow, resonant and deep, as if something vast was compressed into this tiny form. Her cottage appeared through the blizzard like a blessing. Kara stumbled through the door, ice cracking off her clothes as warmth rushed over her. The cub stirred weakly against her chest. She carried it to the fireplace, already reaching for her healing supplies, already knowing that everything had just changed. She had saved a life tonight. Or perhaps something whispered in the back of her mind as those mismatched eyes opened again. It had saved hers. Kara worked by firelight, her hands steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. The cub's wounds were deep, claw marks that spoke of violence, of something that had tried to kill her and left her for dead. She crushed wintermoon leaves into paste, mixed in silverroot oil, and applied the poultices with gentle precision. The cub never whimpered, never flinched. Instead, those mismatched eyes watched Kara with an intelligence that sent chills down her spine. She should have been weak, helpless. A cub this young should barely be aware of its surroundings. But this one tracked every movement Kara made, studied her face with an intensity that felt less like animal curiosity and more like assessment, as if deciding whether Kara was worthy of something. The thought was absurd, yet Kara couldn't shake it. When the wounds were cleaned and wrapped, Kara stood to prepare milk and softened bread. The cub's whimper stopped her immediately. She turned to find the tiny creature trying to drag itself across the floor, injured and weak but determined to follow. Something in Kara's chest cracked open. "All right," she whispered, scooping the cub back into her arms. "I won't leave you." She warmed milk with one hand while holding the cub with the other, and when she offered it in a shallow bowl, the cub drank with careful, controlled movements. No desperate gulping, no puppy clumsiness, just measured efficiency, as if she'd done this 1,000 times before, as if she knew exactly how much she needed and when to stop. The eyes were the strangest part. In the firelight, they seemed to shimmer with their own luminescence, silver and gold dancing in depths that shouldn't exist. Kara told herself it was exhaustion playing tricks on her vision, told herself the heartbeat she felt through the cub's tiny ribcage couldn't possibly resonate like distant thunder. These were impossible things. "Ember," Kara said softly, testing the name on her tongue. "I'll call you Ember, for the way your eyes glow." The cub's gaze locked onto hers, and for a moment Kara could have sworn she saw recognition there, understanding, as if the name meant something to her. When Kara finally collapsed into bed, bone-tired and emotionally drained, she placed Ember on a nest of blankets beside the fireplace. She made it 3 steps toward sleep before the whimpering started again, desperate and heartbreaking. With a sigh that was half exasperation and half tenderness, Kara retrieved the cub and brought her to bed. Ember settled against Kara's throat, her body impossibly warm, almost feverish. But the heat was comforting rather than concerning, spreading through Kara's chest like liquid peace. Within moments, the cub's breathing evened out, and Kara felt her own exhaustion finally pulling her under. She woke to dawn light filtering through her window and the distinct feeling of being watched. Ember was still pressed against her throat, but the cub wasn't sleeping. She was staring at the cottage door with focused intensity, head raised, body tense, not afraid, protective, guarding Kara while she slept. The realization sent a shiver through her that had nothing to do with cold. What kind of cub positioned itself as guardian? What kind of creature barely a day from death's door, already acted like a protector rather than the protected. Kara's wolf stirred uneasily beneath her skin, whimpering softly, as if recognizing something far older than pack or blood, something that made even her own beast uncertain whether to submit or run. 3 days passed, and Ember's wounds healed with unnatural speed. But it wasn't the healing that unsettled Kara. It was everything else. The cub knew things she shouldn't know. When Kara reached for her medicine pouch, Ember was already there, nosing it closer. When Kara's head ached from tension, Ember pressed her warm body against Kara's temples before Kara even registered the pain. It was as if the cub could read her thoughts, anticipate her needs before Kara herself understood them. On the 3rd morning, Kara woke with fever burning through her body. She'd pushed herself too hard gathering herbs in the cold, and now her body demanded payment. She lay in bed, shivering despite the blankets, trying to summon the strength to reach her supplies. Wintermoon leaves would break the fever. She just needed to get up. Something cool and slightly damp touched her palm. Kara's eyes flew open. Ember sat beside her pillow, a cluster of Wintermoon leaves placed carefully in Kara's hand. The exact herb she needed. The cub watched her with those unsettling, mismatched eyes, waiting, as if to say, "Is this what you wanted?" "How did you—" Kara's voice cracked. She hadn't taught Ember anything about herbs, hadn't even spoken aloud about needing them. Yet somehow, this cub, barely a week old, had known exactly which plant to bring and where to find it in Kara's carefully organized stores. Ember tilted her head, then did something that stopped Kara's heart. She howled. It wasn't the yipping cry of a young cub. It was a sound that resonated from somewhere deep and ancient, a call that vibrated through the floorboards and into Kara's bones. The howl carried power that made the air itself seem to thicken, made reality bend around it like light around a flame. Every instinct Kara possessed screamed at her to bare her throat in submission, to flatten herself against the floor and acknowledge the superior predator in her presence. But Ember was barely larger than her hand. It was impossible. Everything about her was impossible. Outside, the forest went absolutely silent. Not a bird chirped, not a branch creaked. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then came the pounding on her door, violent and demanding. "Open up!" Darius's voice carried the authority of his beta rank. But there was something else underneath it. Something that sounded like fear. "What abomination just howled? What are you hiding, Omega?" Ember moved before Kara could react, positioning her tiny body between Kara and the door. The cub's silver-gold eyes blazed with light that had nothing to do with the morning sun, and her small frame seemed to expand somehow, filling the space with presence that defied physical form. Power radiated from her in waves Kara could almost see, rippling outward like heat shimmer. The pounding stopped abruptly. Darius's voice had changed completely, stripped of confidence and command. I need to... Footsteps retreated rapidly, almost running. The beta enforcer, who'd never backed down from anything, was fleeing from a cottage containing nothing more threatening than an Omega and a cub. Except Ember wasn't just a cub. Kara knew that now with crushing certainty. She sank to the floor beside Ember, pulling the trembling creature into her arms. The cub was shaking, but not from fear. From the effort of channeling whatever power had just flooded through her small form. Kara held her close, feeling that impossible heartbeat against her palm, and whispered the question that terrified her. "What are you?" Ember looked up at her with those ancient eyes and pressed her nose against Kara's throat. The gesture was answer enough. Whatever she was, whoever she was, she'd chosen Kara. And that choice was about to change everything. Kara needed water, and the stream was only a short walk from her cottage. She'd made the trip 1,000 times, always careful, always aware of her vulnerability. Omegas learned early to move through the world like ghosts, attracting no attention, provoking no conflict. But today her caution wasn't enough. They emerged from the trees as she knelt by the stream, filling her bucket. 3 rogue wolves, their human forms dirty and feral, their eyes holding the kind of hunger that had nothing to do with food. The leader smiled, revealing teeth too sharp for his human mouth. Well, well, an Omega, all alone. He circled her slowly, savoring her fear. No pack protection out here. No one to hear you scream. Kara's hand tightened on the bucket handle. She could run, but they were faster. Could fight, but she was weaker. Could scream, but the nearest pack member was miles away and wouldn't come for an Omega anyway. Please, she whispered, hating the tremor in her voice. I don't want trouble. Too late for that. The second rogue laughed, moving to cut off her escape. We've been watching you, wondering what you're hiding in that cottage. What could make Darius run like a scared pup? They were closing in, predatory grins widening, when silver lightning streaked past Kara's shoulder. Ember hit the ground between Kara and the rogues, and the world seemed to hold its breath. The cub was still so small, barely reaching Kara's knee even when standing at full height. Against 3 grown male wolves, she should have been nothing. Less than nothing. But the rogues stopped dead, their expressions shifting from amusement to confusion to something that looked like primal terror. Ember's eyes blazed with silver-gold fire, brighter than Kara had ever seen them. Her tiny body trembled, not with fear, but with barely contained power, and when her aura exploded outward, Kara felt it like a physical force. The air itself seemed to crystallize, pressure building until her ears popped and her wolf whimpered in instinctive recognition of something far beyond her understanding. The rogue's knees buckled. These were grown warriors, males who'd chosen the violent freedom of rogue life over pack law. They should have laughed at a cub's challenge, should have crushed her without thought. Instead, they collapsed to the ground in perfect synchronization, necks bared, bodies flattened in absolute submission. The most primal surrender a wolf could offer. Ember moved then, a blur of silver fur and ancient grace. She didn't attack, didn't need to. She simply positioned herself before each rogue in turn, letting them feel the weight of her presence, the crushing certainty that they existed only because she allowed it. The leader managed to lift his head just enough to meet Ember's gaze. His face went white. His lips formed a single word, barely audible. Primordial. Then they were running, scrambling over each other in their desperation to escape, grown wolves fleeing in terror from a cub who should still be nursing. Kara watched them disappear into the forest, her mind struggling to process what she'd just witnessed. Ember turned back to her, power fading from her eyes like embers dying, leaving only that familiar mismatched gaze. The cub walked to Kara on unsteady legs, clearly exhausted and pressed against her shins. Kara sank to her knees, pulling Ember close with shaking hands. The cub's heartbeat thundered against her palm, too fast, too strong. I thought I was protecting you, Kara whispered into silver fur. But as her tears fell and Ember's warmth seeped into her chest, she realized the truth. She had always been protecting me. Thorn lived deep in pack territory, in a cottage that smelled of ancient herbs and secrets. Kara had debated for 2 days before making this journey, terrified of what she might learn, but more terrified of remaining ignorant. The old healer was the only one she trusted, the only wolf who'd ever treated her with something resembling kindness. She knocked softly, Ember tucked inside her cloak where no one could see. The door opened, and Thorn's weathered face creased with concern. Kara, what brings you? He stopped mid-sentence, his entire body going rigid. His eyes, usually warm and knowing, went wide with something that looked like recognition and fear combined. Then his wolf emerged without warning, gray fur rippling across his skin as the shift took him halfway. And the massive beast did something Kara had never seen in all her years of knowing him. It lowered its head in complete submission. Thorn's wolf, ancient and powerful, seasoned by centuries of life, bowed before Kara's cloak, before what it sensed hidden there. The healer forced his shift back with visible effort, breathing hard, his hands shaking. "Show me," he whispered. Kara pulled Ember free, and the cub's mismatched eyes fixed on Thorn with that unnerving intelligence. The old healer stared for a long moment, then gestured them inside with urgent haste, slamming the door and drawing symbols of warding across it with practiced speed. "Put her on the table." The examination was thorough and increasingly disturbing. Thorn's hands moved over Ember's small body, and with each discovery, his expression grew more grave. He measured bone density and made a sound of disbelief, checked her teeth and went pale, listened to her heartbeat and had to sit down. "This is impossible," he muttered, reaching for vials and instruments Kara had never seen him use. "Her bones are 3 times denser than they should be. Her musculature is wrong, too developed, too efficient. And her heart." He trailed off, unable to find words. "What is she, Thorn?" "I need to perform a blood test, an old one. Forbidden." He looked at Kara with desperate intensity. "Do you trust me?" "Yes." The ritual was ancient, involving silver needles and moon water and words in a language that made Kara's skin prickle. When Thorn drew Ember's blood into a crystal vial, they both gasped. The blood glowed faintly silver, pulsing with its own luminescence like liquid starlight. Thorn added 3 drops to a mixture he'd prepared, and the entire bowl erupted in silver fire. Symbols appeared in the flames, old as time, and the healer's face drained of all color. His hands trembled so badly he nearly dropped the bowl. No, this can't be right. "Thorn, please, tell me." He looked at her with eyes that held centuries of knowledge and knew terrible understanding. "She carries the markers of the primordial wolves, the first shifters who walked with gods, who existed before pacts, before hierarchy, before law." His voice dropped to a whisper. "The ones who made alphas kneel. Primordial." The word fell between them like a stone down a well, the silence after more terrifying than the word itself. "They've been extinct for thousands of years," Thorn continued, his voice shaking. "We thought them legends, stories to teach cubs about the old ways. But she's real. And child, if the Alpha Council learns of this, they'll either try to control her or destroy her as a threat to everything they've built. They can't have her." The primordials answered to no Alpha. They bowed to no law but the moon herself. Thorn gripped Kara's shoulders with desperate strength. "Hide her or lose her. Those are your only choices." "Take a breath. This is the moment everything could fall apart. If you've ever had to protect something precious against impossible odds, drop a comment below. Tell me what you were protecting. And if you believe loyalty matters more than power, hit subscribe. This community stands with the overlooked and the brave." Kara told herself she could maintain some semblance of normalcy. She needed supplies, and hiding would only draw more suspicion. So she wrapped Ember in a sling against her chest, concealing most of her body, and walked to the market square with her head down and her heart hammering. The morning bustle surrounded her, vendors calling out prices, cubs laughing, wolves greeting each other with easy familiarity. The sounds of pack life she'd never truly been part of. For a few precious moments, Kara let herself pretend everything was normal. Then the whispers started. She felt eyes on her back, conversations dying as she passed. The crowd didn't part exactly, but people edged away, their wolves stirring uneasily beneath their skin. They couldn't see Ember clearly, but they sensed something. Something that made their instincts scream warnings they didn't understand. Kara was selecting vegetables with trembling hands when the Beta warriors arrived. Castor and Lyra moved through the crowd with the easy confidence of those who'd never been challenged, never been denied. Both were seasoned fighters, their bodies carrying scars of battles won, their eyes holding the certainty of their rank. They stopped in front of Kara's stall, blocking her exit. "Omega," Castor's voice carried across the suddenly silent market. "You're harboring an unregistered wolf. Pack law requires all wolves be presented to the Alpha Council within 3 days of arrival. You're well past that deadline." "She's just a cub," Kara whispered, trying to sound meek, trying to disappear. "She was dying. I saved her." "Then you won't mind surrendering her now," Lyra's hand extended, demanding, "for proper registration and evaluation." Ember stirred against Kara's chest. A low sound emerged from the sling, and the market square seemed to vibrate with it. It wasn't a puppy's growl, it was the sound of mountains grinding together, of ancient stone shifting beneath the earth, of power so vast it couldn't be contained in something so small. The Beta warriors froze. Then Ember's aura exploded outward in a visible wave of silver light that rippled through the air like heat shimmer given form. The power struck everyone in the market square, but it focused on the two warriors standing before Kara with their demands and their certainty. Castor's knees buckled first. His face twisted in confusion and horror as his body betrayed him, forcing him down in submission he couldn't control. Lyra followed a heartbeat later, both proud Beta warriors collapsing to the ground with their necks bared, their wolves howling in terror inside their minds. "Impossible," Castor gasped, fighting against his own body's surrender. "Only the Alpha King can make me kneel. Only Fenrir himself has this power. What is she?" The market erupted in chaos. Vegetables tumbled from carts as people scrambled backward. Someone screamed. A child started crying. The crowd's fear turned the air thick and suffocating, and Kara saw that fear beginning to curdle into something darker, something that looked like mob violence waiting to ignite. "Abomination!" someone shouted from the crowd. "She's brought a curse among us! The Omega has violated the sacred laws!" Kara didn't wait to hear more. She clutched Ember close and ran, tears streaming down her face as the crowd's hostility chased her through the square. Behind her, she could hear Castor and Lyra finally struggling to their feet, their voices raised in commands to stop her, to seize the creature, to protect the pack from this threat. She made it to the forest before her legs gave out, collapsing against a tree with Ember pressed to her chest. The cub was trembling from exhaustion, her power spent, reduced once again to something small and vulnerable. But Kara knew the truth now with crushing certainty. The secret was out, and they were coming for her, coming for them both. They came at nightfall, and Kara knew before she opened the door who stood on the other side. The weight of his presence pressed against her cottage like a physical force, making the walls creak and the air grow dense with power. Alpha King Fenrir had come, and he'd brought the full Alpha Council with him. The door didn't just open. It splintered inward under the force of his command, wood cracking and hinges tearing free. Fenrir filled the doorway like a force of nature given form. Tall, broad-shouldered, his eyes holding the gold of a predator who'd never known defeat. Behind him, the council fanned out in formation, their faces hard with judgment and fear. "Omega." His voice rolled through the cottage like thunder. "You harbor a creature that threatens pack stability. The council has voted. The wolf cub will be surrendered immediately for examination and containment." Kara's legs trembled, but she stepped in front of Ember anyway, her body a pathetic shield against the most powerful wolf in the territory. "No." Fenrir's eyebrows rose in genuine surprise. Omegas didn't refuse Alpha Kings. It simply didn't happen. His expression shifted from surprise to something like pity, as if she were a child who didn't understand the reality of her situation. "This isn't a request." He stepped forward with the casual certainty of someone who'd never been denied anything. "Move aside, or I'll move you. You'll have to kill me first." The words left her mouth before she could stop them, and she saw the Alpha Council members exchange glances. Fenrir's eyes narrowed, his patience evaporating. He moved with blinding speed, reaching past Kara to simply take what he wanted. Ember stepped forward to meet him. The cub was still so small, barely larger than Kara's forearm, silver fur catching the firelight. She should have been nothing to this mountain of a man. But when her mismatched eyes locked onto Fenrir's, the Alpha King froze, mid-reach. The aura that exploded from Ember's tiny body was different this time, fuller, more complete, as if she'd been holding back until this moment, conserving her strength for a threat worthy of her true power. Silver gold light blazed from her eyes like twin suns, and the air itself seemed to crystallize around her, reality bending to accommodate something that shouldn't exist in this world. Fenrir's face went from confident to confused to horrified in the space of a heartbeat. His knees buckled. The Alpha King, the unconquerable, the wolf who had built his legend on never submitting to any living thing, collapsed to the cottage floor with his neck bared in absolute surrender. His body betrayed him completely, forcing him into submission so profound that his wolf howled its recognition inside his mind. The Alpha Council stood frozen, watching their king kneel before a cub, and the fear on their faces was raw and undeniable. "What?" Fenrir's voice shook, his pride and confusion warring for dominance. "What are you?" Ember didn't answer. She simply stood there, blazing with ancient power, letting him feel the weight of what she was. Letting them all understand that hierarchy meant nothing in the face of true primordial authority. Kara stared at the scene before her, at the most powerful wolf in the territory kneeling on her cottage floor, and something clicked into place. She'd been so afraid they would take Ember from her, so terrified of what they might do. But standing there watching Fenrir tremble, she finally understood. Ember wasn't the one who should be afraid. They were. They called him the Unconquerable, but there he was, the Alpha King himself, kneeling before the cub she'd rescued from the snow, and Kara understood then with crystalline clarity. This was never about her saving Ember. It was about Ember choosing her. Fenrir remained on his knees for a long moment, trembling with the effort of fighting against submission his body demanded. Finally, with visible strain, he forced himself upright, though he kept careful distance from Ember. His eyes held new wariness, new calculation. The pride was still there, but tempered now by something that looked like respect mixed with fear. "You understand what she is," he said to Kara, his voice rough from the ordeal. "What she represents. A power that answers to no alpha, that recognizes no hierarchy. She's too dangerous to remain uncontrolled." "She's not dangerous. She's protecting me. Today." Fenrir's gaze was steady, assessing. "But what happens when she's fully grown? When that power develops beyond what we just witnessed? She could tear apart pack structure with a thought. Could make every wolf in the territory bow whether they choose to or not." He paused, letting his words sink in. "She threatens everything we've built." The Alpha Council murmured agreement behind him, their faces hard with conviction. But Fenrir raised a hand, silencing them. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, almost kind. "I'm not unreasonable, Kara. I understand you've formed an attachment." He stepped closer, careful to keep Ember in his peripheral vision. "Surrender her to the Council and I'll give you anything you want. Wealth, status. I'll elevate you to beta rank. No, higher. You'll never be dismissed or overlooked again. You'll have respect, power, everything an Omega dreams of." Kara's breath caught. Everything he offered was everything she'd been denied her entire life. The chance to be seen, to matter, to have value in pack eyes. She looked at Ember, who pressed against her leg, silver gold eyes watching her steadily, not demanding, not pleading, simply trusting. This cub who'd chosen her when no one else would, who'd protected her not because of rank or law, but because of something deeper than either. Kara remembered every moment of rejection, every time someone had looked through her as if she didn't exist, every casual cruelty delivered by those who believed their rank gave them permission. She'd spent her entire life trying to be small enough, quiet enough, invisible enough to survive in a world that saw her as worthless. But standing there with Ember at her side, feeling that ancient power humming between them like a living thing, she finally understood. They thought she was nothing. An Omega with no power, no voice, no value. They were wrong. No. Her voice was steady despite the terror coursing through her veins. She's mine, not by pack law, by something older than your hierarchy. And I will die before I let you take her. The moment the words left her mouth, Ember's power surged upward in response. Not aggressive, not threatening, but unmistakable. Silver gold light blazed around them both, wrapping Kara in warmth that felt like recognition, like acceptance, like coming home. Ancient magic responding to courage it deemed worthy. Fenrir stared at them, and something shifted in his expression. Wonder replaced calculation. His eyes widened as if seeing something he'd only read about in forgotten texts. "The prophecy," he whispered. "An Omega of pure heart shall be chosen by the primordial returned. Together they will challenge all we believe about strength and worth." He looked at Kara with new eyes. "I thought it was legend." The Alpha Council erupted in protest, demanding he take action, but Fenrir silenced them with a gesture that brooked no argument. "No." He straightened to his full height, but this time his posture held respect rather than dominance. "Perhaps the moon goddess knows better than we do about who should guard such power." He met Kara's eyes directly. "You and Ember are under my personal protection. Anyone who threatens you answers to me." Kara just defied the Alpha King himself and won. If you can't stand systems that demand you surrender what you love, hit that subscribe button. Trolls and bullies won't. Comment, "I chose courage." If you believe courage beats hierarchy every time, there's one more chapter, and you won't want to miss how this ends. The days that followed changed everything in ways Kara never could have imagined. Her cottage was no longer a place of exile, but a destination. High-ranking wolves approached with careful respect, bowing their heads before entering, asking permission rather than demanding entry. The transformation wasn't just in how they treated her. It was in how she carried herself, standing straight instead of hunched, meeting eyes instead of averting her gaze. Ember grew stronger with each passing day, her primordial nature fully awakening. She was larger now, though still far from full-grown. Her silver fur gleaming with an otherworldly sheen that caught light in impossible ways. But it was her presence that had changed most, no longer hidden, no longer suppressed, but radiating power with every breath. Thorn visited often, bringing ancient texts he'd kept hidden for centuries. One evening by candlelight, he showed Kara a prophecy written in the old tongue, his weathered finger tracing words that made her breath catch. "When the primordial returns, she will choose a guardian of pure heart, one the pack overlooked. Together they will remind the wolves what true pack means, not hierarchy built on dominance, but bonds forged in love." Tears blurred Kara's vision as understanding crashed over her. She'd thought she was saving Ember that frozen night in the forest, but the truth was far more profound. They had saved each other. 3 weeks after Fenrir's declaration, Kara stood on the hillside overlooking pack lands. watching sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Ember pressed against her side, now nearly reaching her waist, radiating warmth and contentment. Below them, pack members moved through their evening routines, and several looked up toward the hillside, not with fear or hostility, but with something that looked like reverence. Ember lifted her head and howled, and this time the sound was different. Still powerful, still resonant with ancient authority, but woven through with something new. Harmony, unity, an invitation rather than a command. The howl spoke of bonds that transcended rank, of strength found in loyalty rather than domination, of pack as it was meant to be. Below, wolves stopped and listened, and Kara saw tears on warriors' faces as they recognized something they'd forgotten, something precious they'd lost in their obsession with hierarchy. Kara buried her hand in Ember's fur, feeling the steady rhythm of that impossible heartbeat, and finally allowed herself to understand the full truth. She wasn't an Omega anymore. Not in any way that mattered. She wasn't weak or worthless or invisible. She was Ember's, and Ember was hers. And that bond, forged in compassion and tested in courage, made them something the pack had never seen before. Unstoppable. "I thought I was rescuing you," Kara whispered into the fading light. "But you gave me something far more precious. You gave me myself." Ember turned her mismatched eyes toward Kara, and in their depths Kara saw everything. Recognition, gratitude, love that transcended species and defied explanation. They had found each other in that frozen forest, two souls the world had tried to destroy, and together they had become something neither could have been alone. The prophecy was fulfilled. The pack would never be the same. And Kara had never felt more complete.